July 20th, 1969. You hear people say it was humanity's greatest achievement. They're wrong. Because if you had actually been there, if you had felt the Saturn V shaking your bones apart, if you had looked out that tiny window and seen Earth becoming smaller, if you had stood on the surface of another world while total silence surrounded you, you wouldn't call it an achievement. You'd call it terrifying and beautiful and unbelievably fragile. Because nobody tells you this part. We almost didn't make it back. People remember the famous words, the flags, the grainy footage, but they don't remember the alarms, the panic, the fuel running out, the fear that every tiny sound inside the spacecraft might be the one that kills you. And I remember all of it, because I was there. I was there when humanity left Earth and touched the moon for the very first time. Before the moon, there was fear. Cold War fear. The kind that hangs over entire countries like a storm cloud. America and the Soviet Union weren't just competing anymore. They were measuring power. Technology, intelligence, control, and space became the battlefield. The Soviets struck first. Sputnik, 1957, a metal sphere no bigger than a beach ball. But when it beeped over American skies, it sounded like humiliation. Then came Yuri Gagarin, 1961, the first human in space, one orbit around Earth, and suddenly the Soviets looked unstoppable. America was behind, badly behind. That's when President John F. Kennedy stood before Congress and made a promise so insane most people thought it was political theater. He said America would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade ended. Think about that. At the time, computers were weaker than modern calculators. Nobody had ever walked in space for long periods. Nobody had docked spacecraft reliably. Nobody knew if humans could even survive deep space psychologically. And Kennedy basically said, we're going to another world. Not eventually, not someday. Within 8 years. People laughed. Engineers didn't. Because they understood what that meant. It meant inventing technology that did not exist. It meant solving problems nobody had encountered. It meant risking human lives publicly. And people did die. The Apollo program was built on brilliance and tragedy. Apollo 1, 1967. A launch rehearsal. 3 astronauts inside the command module. Gus Grissom, Ed White, Roger Chaffee. Then fire. Pure oxygen atmosphere. The cabin became an oven in seconds. They never escaped. The hatch opened too slowly. By the time ground crews got inside, it was over. The smell lingered for weeks. Burned wiring, burned metal, burned dreams. NASA changed after that. Everything became sharper, more paranoid, more disciplined. Because the moon no longer felt symbolic. It felt lethal. And somehow, that made us want it more. People imagine astronauts as fearless. That's Hollywood nonsense. The best astronauts were usually the calmest under pressure. Test pilots, engineers, men who could watch a warning light flash during a death spiral and still speak in complete sentences. I came from that world. Military aviation, long flights, violent landings, tiny margins for error. Back then, flying experimental aircraft meant signing an unspoken agreement. One day, your luck may run out. And yet, when NASA called, every pilot wanted in. Because this wasn't just flying. This was history. Training consumed us. Simulations, vacuum chambers, zero-gravity flights, navigation drills, emergency procedures. Again and again and again. NASA trained us until reactions became instinct. Because in space, hesitation kills. People don't realize how cramped the Apollo spacecraft really was. The command module looked futuristic from outside. Inside, it felt like sitting inside a metal closet packed with switches. Every inch mattered. Every button mattered. One mistake, and there would be no rescue mission, no emergency landing, no roadside assistance in orbit, just silence and death. The Saturn V rocket itself looked impossible, 363 feet tall. Still the most powerful rocket humans have ever successfully flown. Standing beneath it was surreal. You couldn't fully process the scale. It towered over the launch pad like a skyscraper made of explosives. Because that's exactly what it was. 3 million kilograms of fuel, controlled violence. And somehow, we were expected to sit on top of it. July 16th, 1969, Cape Kennedy, Florida. The morning air was thick and humid. Thousands gathered near the beaches. Families, reporters, scientists, tourists. Even people who hated NASA showed up, because everyone understood something historic was about to happen. Inside the suit room, everything felt quieter, not peaceful, heavy. Like everyone was pretending not to think about the risks. The suits were uncomfortable, hot, restrictive. You felt every heartbeat inside them. Then came the walkout, that famous slow walk toward the van. Cameras everywhere, people cheering. And yet, all I could think about was the rocket, waiting. The elevator ride up the Saturn V felt endless. Higher, higher, higher. Until the Earth itself seemed distant. Then we climbed inside, strapped in, lying on our backs. Surrounded by switches and checklists, the countdown echoed through our headsets. T-minus 10 minutes, then 5, then 1. At first, nothing happened. Then ignition. You didn't hear it first. You felt it. A deep vibration rising through your spine, the entire spacecraft trembling violently. Then suddenly movement. Slow at first, heavy, like the rocket was struggling against gravity itself. And then, it committed. The Saturn V roared upward. The vibration became savage. You could barely read instruments through the shaking. Your chest rattled, your vision blurred. Outside the windows, Florida disappeared beneath clouds. Then stage separation. A violent jolt. Silence for half a second. Then ignition again. Every astronaut remembered that silence, because for one horrifying moment, you wondered if the next stage failed. If the mission had just ended. But it kept going. Faster, higher, until finally, weightlessness. And suddenly the straps floated. Pens drifted. Tiny particles hovered in the cabin. Earth curved beneath us. Blue, bright, fragile, and unbelievably small. That's when it hit me. We were leaving home. People think space feels exciting every second. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it feels deeply unsettling. Because space is quiet in a way humans aren't built for. No wind, no distant traffic, no birds, nothing. Only machine sounds, fans, switches, breathing. You become hyper-aware of every noise. A strange vibration could mean disaster. A strange smell could mean electrical fire. Even sleeping felt unnatural. You floated inside your sleeping restraints while Earth drifted far behind. And every few hours, Mission Control checked in. Houston became our lifeline. A calm voice from nearly 250,000 miles away. The spacecraft itself was split into sections. The command module, Columbia, and the lunar module, Eagle. The Eagle looked fragile, like somebody built it from foil and optimism. Thin walls, spidery legs, angular shapes, not aerodynamic. Because aerodynamics don't matter on the moon. Every kilogram mattered. The lunar module existed for one purpose only: land, and somehow survive long enough to leave. During the journey, we performed course corrections. Tiny engine burns, small changes with enormous consequences. Space navigation is terrifyingly precise. One mistake at the wrong angle, and you miss the moon entirely. Then came lunar orbit insertion, the engine burn that would allow the moon's gravity to capture us. If the engine failed, we'd slingshot into deep space, forever. That thought stayed in everyone's mind. Nobody said it out loud, but we all knew. The burn began. The engine roared. The moon vanished beneath us. And for the first time in history, human beings disappeared behind another world. Mission Control lost contact temporarily. No communication, no reassurance, only us. And the far side of the moon, the surface looked haunting. Gray, scarred, ancient, crater after crater stretching endlessly into darkness. No atmosphere, No life, no sound. It felt less like a place, and more like a fossil from the beginning of time. This was it, the moment humanity had trained for. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin climbed into Eagle. Michael Collins remained in lunar orbit inside Columbia. People forget Collins sometimes. That's unfair. He orbited alone, while two men descended to another world, possibly the loneliest human in history. The Eagle separated, slowly drifting away, and suddenly, everything became real. The descent computer guided us downward. At first, everything looked good. Then alarms started. 1202, 1203. Program alarms. Nobody had seen them during the actual mission before. The computer was overloaded. For a few seconds, nobody knew if we should abort. Houston scrambled. Guidance officers checked calculations. Then came the call, go. We continued descending. But the problems weren't over. Neil looked outside. The planned landing site was terrible. Boulders everywhere, a crater ahead. Automatic landing would destroy us. So he took manual control. Fuel dropping, altitude dropping, dust everywhere. The lunar surface kicked upward beneath the engine. Visibility worsening, warnings blaring. 30 seconds of fuel remaining. That sentence alone still makes my heart pound. 30 seconds. Imagine the pressure. The entire world watching. Years of work, billions of dollars, history itself balancing on half a minute of fuel. Then contact light. Engine stop. Silence. We had landed. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We just sat there, staring at the instruments, realizing humans were sitting on the moon. Then Neil transmitted the words history would never forget. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Mission control erupted. Grown engineers cried openly. Applause, relief, exhaustion. Humanity had done it, but we still had to survive. The suits took forever to prepare. Checklist after checklist. Every movement slow, methodical. Because mistakes on the moon don't get second chances. Then the hatch opened, and lunar light poured inside. The ladder looked deceptively simple, but climbing down, it felt unreal. The moon wasn't glowing silver like movies show. It looked gray, muted, almost colorless, like old ash. Neil reached the final rung, paused, then stepped onto the surface. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. People have heard the sentence 1,000 times, but hearing it live, while knowing nobody had ever stood there before, felt different. It felt impossible. The dust behaved strangely, fine like powder, but sticky, almost electrostatic. Every footprint remained perfectly preserved, no wind to erase them. Some of those prints may still exist millions of years from now. That thought haunted me. We moved carefully. The gravity was weaker. Walking became a strange bouncing motion. At first, it felt fun. Then you remembered. One torn suit, and you die. The sky above the moon looked pitch black, even during daylight. No atmosphere to scatter sunlight. Just darkness, pure cosmic darkness. And hanging above it all was Earth. Small, blue, alive. Every war, every city, every human being, all hanging there silently in space. I cannot properly explain what that does to your mind. National borders vanished emotionally. Politics vanished. Arguments vanished. Earth stopped feeling enormous. It looked fragile, beautiful, temporary. We planted the American flag, collected samples, set up scientific experiments, took photographs. But the strangest thing wasn't the landscape. It was the silence. Absolute silence. Inside the suit you heard breathing, fans, radio chatter. But outside? Nothing. Not even footsteps. The moon absorbed everything. And occasionally, I would stop moving completely, just to stare, because some part of my brain still refused to believe it was real. People imagine the dangerous part ended after landing. No. Landing was only half the nightmare. We still had to leave. And there was one terrifying reality hanging over every astronaut on the moon. If the ascent engine failed, we were dead. No rescue mission possible. No backup ship. Nothing. President Nixon even had a speech prepared in case we died there. A public funeral script. Already written before we launched. Think about that. The world celebrated us while simultaneously preparing for our deaths. The ascent stage engine had never been tested in lunar conditions before. Not fully. NASA trusted mathematics, engineering, theory. But theory doesn't comfort you when your life depends on ignition. Before liftoff, we rested briefly inside Eagle. The cabin smelled strange. Metal, plastic, sweat, dust. Moon dust got everywhere. It irritated the throat and eyes. And all the while, Earth hung outside the window. So close visually. So impossibly far away. Then came launch time. We armed the systems, prepared for ascent, and waited. That pause before ignition felt eternal. Then engine start. A violent kick upward. The ascent stage blasted off the lunar surface while the lower half of Eagle remained behind forever. The moon fell away beneath us, and suddenly, we knew we had a chance to survive. Docking with Columbia felt emotional. Michael Collins welcomed us back calmly, but beneath the professionalism, you could hear relief. Nobody wanted to become the astronaut remembered for leaving crewmates stranded on the moon. The journey home felt different. Lighter emotionally, but physically exhausting. People underestimate re-entry. You slam into Earth's atmosphere at hypersonic speed. The heat shield faces temperatures hotter than lava, and during re-entry blackout, communications vanish. Again. No contact, only fire outside the capsule windows. The spacecraft shook violently. Then parachutes deployed. One, then another, then the final canopy. The Pacific Ocean rushed upward. Splashdown. Mission complete. The hatch opened. Fresh air flooded inside. Earth air, ocean air, human air. After days in space, it smelled incredible. But there was still fear, contamination. Nobody knew if lunar microbes existed. So we entered quarantine afterward, locked away while scientists monitored us. The irony was unbelievable. We had survived space, only to be trapped in a trailer afterward. And yet none of us complained. Because humanity had crossed a line history would never uncross. Humans had walked on another world. People often ask what the moon landing changed. Technology? Sure. Computers advanced. Engineering advanced. Materials science advanced. But honestly, that's not the real answer. The moon landing changed perspective. For the first time in human history, our species looked back at Earth from somewhere else. And once you see Earth that way, you can never fully return mentally. The planet stops feeling infinite. You realize how thin the atmosphere really is, how isolated humanity truly is, how absurd most conflicts appear from far away. On the moon, there were no countries, no borders, no politics, only one distant world glowing in darkness, home. And maybe that was the real achievement, not conquering the moon, understanding Earth. Here's the strange part. After everything, after all the danger, all the celebration, all the history, humans stopped going. Apollo missions continued briefly. Apollo 12, 14, 15, 16, 17. Then it ended. Budget cuts. Political interest faded. The greatest adventure in human history slowly became old news. Imagine risking your life to reach another world, only for future generations to debate whether it even happened. That's the irony. The impossible became ordinary so quickly, people forgot how miraculous it really was. But I remember the shaking rocket, the alarms, the black sky, the gray dust, the silence, and Earth hanging above the horizon like a fragile blue lantern in the dark. I remember the moment humanity stopped being trapped to one world. Because for a few brief hours, we were something new. Not nations, not rivals, not enemies, explorers. And standing there on the moon, with Earth glowing silently above me, I realized something terrifying. Space was never the final frontier. We were.